This is Optimal Finance Daily, episode 1843. Why Create an Emergency Fund? Part 2 by Scott Rieckens of playingwithfire.co. And I'm your host and personal finance enthusiast, Diana Merriam. Now, today's post is a continuation from yesterday. So if you're new here, I'd recommend listening to yesterday's episode first. But if you're all caught up, let's hear part 2 and continue optimizing your life. Why Create an Emergency Fund? Part 2 by Scott Rieckens of playingwithfire.co. How to create and keep an emergency fund. Starting an emergency fund couldn't be easier. Simply follow the steps here and you'll already be on your way. Choose a bank. The first thing you'll need to do is choose an appropriate bank. A savings account is always a good idea as you can earn a little bit of interest on your savings over time. However, some people prefer to just open a regular account with a bank. The choice is up to you. As long as you have something to separate your emergency fund from the rest of your money, then that's good enough. We use Ally Bank for our emergency fund. While it's hard to find high-interest savings accounts these days, we've found them to be highly competitive and easy to use. We've worked with them on our Playing with Fire movie tour, and the team at Ally stands out as some of our best partners through that experience. That matters. There are other ways to access an emergency fund, like taking out a HELOC on your home or locking up a portion of your emergency fund in high-interest stablecoin. But we chose to keep 6 months' worth of expenses in cash in an Ally Bank savings account because we feel more comfortable having access to cash at any given time. Don't give in to temptation. When you have a large sum of money stashed away, it can be very tempting to just dip into it every now and again. You should resist this urge and use your emergency fund for emergencies only. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose. Save more money. Whenever you get a bit of extra money, or if you pay off any debts and find yourself with more money, start adding a little bit more to your emergency fund. The sooner you can reach your savings goal, the better, as you'll feel so much relief in knowing that you have that money sat there just in case you ever need it. Of course, once you've reached your goal, you'll want to keep that savings habit going and start putting that money towards investments. When can you use your emergency fund? It can be tricky to determine when you should or shouldn't use your emergency fund. How do you know what's considered an emergency and what's not? The answer to this question is sometimes very obvious, and other times it's not that easy. For example, if you're thinking of going on holiday and don't quite have enough for it, this is no excuse to go dipping into your emergency fund. However, if your car breaks down and you can't get anywhere, this is classed as an emergency. You need your car to get around, so you should use your emergency fund to fix it. The tricky part comes when you need to decide on things in between. Smaller problems such as your computer breaking, or if you get an unexpected bill. These types of problems will ultimately depend on what you think is right. For us, we like to put these decisions through a FIRE lens. Do we absolutely need to fix this? If so, are there any alternatives to fixing this problem besides an outright purchase or replacement? Basically, we will try to find any excuse not to spend money on an issue. If it can't be worked out creatively, then we may go to our emergency fund to get it taken care of. The do's and don'ts of an emergency fund. Now that you know all about what an emergency fund is and why it's important, let's take a quick look at the do's and don'ts of an emergency fund. Do: calculate your earnings and average monthly expenses. Stay consistent with your savings. Keep the pace of your savings with new expenses. Analyze your circumstances and set realistic goals. Open a high-interest savings account. And keep your money fund separate from your other money and know when an emergency is qualified. Don't: fund an emergency fund before paying down high-interest debt. Dip into your savings. Or save too much. You'll want excess to go towards investments. Final thoughts. After you've paid down high interest debt and analyzed and minimized the fees you're paying on your investments, it's time to save for an emergency fund. Hopefully, you won't need to worry about using it very often. However, it will give you great peace of mind knowing that you have some money set aside just in case the worst happens and you do end up needing it. It also may come in handy one day if you have an investment opportunity arise and feel confident in your ability to replenish your fund in a timely manner. If you keep realistic goals in mind and avoid dipping into your savings, it's very easy to create and keep an emergency fund and critical to a well-rounded financial position. You just listened to part 2 of the post titled Why Create an Emergency Fund by Scott Rieckens of playingwithfire.co. While it's a highly personal decision of how much you need in your emergency fund, I personally keep about a year of expenses. I find that entrepreneurs and self-employed people should consider a larger emergency/opportunity fund because our income is less certain. Many of us don't receive regular paychecks, so having a larger cash cushion helps us better manage the feast and famine of self-employment. I also feel that a strong cash position has replaced the role that bonds would serve in balancing out volatility in my investment portfolio. I have a 100% stock asset allocation for simplicity, but the volatility of this asset allocation doesn't bother me because it's highly unlikely that I'll need to tap into those investments anytime soon due to my strong cash cushion. I've seen different ways of organizing the cash you keep on hand. Many people will have an emergency fund that they never touch and then create other piles they refer to as sinking funds to save for known future expenses. For example, vacations or a house or a new car fund, etc. This is another reason why my emergency fund is so large. I don't organize my cash into different piles. I just have one catch-all, and I'm relying on my discernment to spend that cash and replenish it responsibly. The main thing I got out of this article is that you do need to have some cash on hand, but where you store it, how you organize it, and how much cash you need is highly variable and dependent on your preferences and circumstances. And that's another episode and weekend of Optimal Finance Daily in the books. Thank you for your support and for listening every day. I'll be back with more posts for you on Monday. So have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll catch you tomorrow where your optimal life awaits.